Okay, so I'm going to talk about your go-to-market and how to actually structure your sequencing and messaging out. So let's just assume you already have an understanding of like what contact data you have for your prospects and then which channels you're going to use. And we're just talking about messaging now. Okay, so focusing on messaging, we first want to understand, this is how you build out the infrastructure, is like, what is your TAM from a volume perspective? And what I mean by that is like, you have your ICPs, which is your ideal customer profile, and this is going to be by accounts or companies. And then you're going to have your personas, and these are the individuals within the companies that you're trying to target or get in front of. So you can ultimately have, one, two, three, sometimes maybe five different personas within an account that actually would make sense to sell into, right? So you have influencers and decision makers, end users, etc. We won't get into all that, but let's just say, for example, there are three personas within every ICP that you want to get in front of, right? And let's just say, for example, you have, I don't know, let's just use 10,000 potential accounts or companies that would make a good customer for you. This is going to be your TAM from a volume perspective. So out of the entire market, there's about 10,000 companies that would make a good fit as a customer as of today. Okay, let's just say that. So in total, you have about 30,000 contacts that you need to aggregate as part of your database. And your database is going to be your biggest asset, right? And so within those, you want as many contact points as you can possibly get. So email address, phone numbers, physical mailing addresses, LinkedIn URLs, other social media URLs, for example. Those are going to be the channels that you can use to create a sequence to get messages in front of them. And so the idea here is like, let's just say, for example, the number's 30,000. What you're going to want to do is after you get and you build a database of all of these contacts, you want to divide this. We can arbitrarily, let's just say, by 10 weeks. And this will give us an even 3,000 per cohort. Now, how this works is that you have 3,000 in every single cohort, and you're going to have 10 cohorts, right? And then this gets you to the 30,000 contacts. And so what you're going to do is every cohort, you're going to start in a new week some kind of a sequence. So, for example, week 1 will be cohort 1, which equals to about 3,000 contacts that are going to be enrolled in this sequence. And then week 2 will be cohort 2, another 3,000. Week 3, cohort 3, another 3,000, etc. until you get to week 10, cohort 10. And this is going to be your last 3,000 to get through your entire database, right? Which then by week 11, what you should be doing is going back to cohort 1 with new messaging. Now, the idea here is that every time you run a sequence, this could be like email day 1, LinkedIn ad request on day 2, cold call day 3, whatever it might be, whatever you structured it to be. This is irregardless of that. But you're going to put them through, a multi-touch sequence, and you're going to then give them a break. In this instance, a break for about 10 weeks before you go back with another form of messaging. The goal here is to get to a binary response, which is like equals to a yes or a no from everybody in these 30,000 contacts. So this is the end goal over the course of years, right? So as you put them through this initial cohort, this first sequence, out of 3,000, you might get, let's just say, a 1% to 2% response rate out of that. And then the rest of the 98, 99%, you're not going to have gotten any response, so you don't know where they stand, and so you're going to re-enroll them into this week 11 sequence. Now, as you go through all of this, there's an ideology that I think about, which is traditionally most B2B companies, they just keep bombarding you with ROI sequences. They don't have this kind of like structured way of like re-hitting up the different cohorts. And a lot of the sales enablement tools like Apollo doesn't really allow you to structure it like this. So this is a lot of stuff you have to do somewhat manually or ad hoc. And then the language, for example, that I would say is like, this, you need to break it up and give them a little bit of different flavors of things that you can say. So let me just show you for this. Let's just say now you already understand the way that you're going to break up your database, and say in cohort 1 in this week 1, cohort 1, we're going to do an ROI sequence, okay? This is the most common thing we typically see, but it'll be, what does this SaaS solution do in terms of like adding to top line revenue or improving bottom line margins somehow? And then you're gonna do, 3, 4, 5 touches or whatever. It's all gonna be centered on ROI with probably a call to action of like getting into some kind of a sales demo. And then what you're gonna do then now is like on week 11, because after the full 10 get exhausted, you're gonna come back to cohort 1. But instead of doing like another ROI sequence, what you probably want to do here is then invite them to be a guest on a webinar, okay? And the reason why is because this is a little bit of an easier ask than it would be from getting somebody into a sales motion. And I can cover in a later, a later recording of like how to structure webinars and podcasts and product advisory boards in a way where they're basically entering a sales motion. You're using this as just a way to elicit engagement, but it's not about anything else other than that. And then try to get them to sales later. And then say like after this, another 10 weeks later, right? You're going to be on week 21, cohort 1. You'll want to put them through another ROI sequence perhaps. And now we're talking about between these two times is 20 weeks, right? Again, you can make this a lot shorter. You can break it up into 5 weeks or what have you, 6 weeks. That's typically the average that I would like to do. But between these ROI sequences, 20 weeks, right? So the idea is that by the time you get to this second touch of ROI sequencing, that you should have a lot more social proof, more logos, customers, right? You're gonna have new product features. You're just gonna have a ton more to do or share in this next ROI sequence, right? And then again, we're gonna do this week 31, week 31, and then week 41. By week 41, you're gonna go through another ROI sequence, right? And now we're talking about like a total of 40 weeks later. You've only done 3 different types of ROI sequences, and that should give you a lot of time to add a bunch more of this stuff. In this week 31, what you could do is like instead of a webinar, you could invite them to be a guest on a podcast, for example, right? Week 51, you could invite them to product advisory board. Week 61, we're already talking about over a year out. Do another ROI sequence. And then ultimately, you can recycle these things like the podcast and the webinar and the product advisory board. And those are just only 3 pieces, but these are all ways to actually leverage content and the creation of the content as top of funnel exercise versus creating content to then use as collateral to generate top of funnel. Because you're using this as outreach to get engagement from these different cohorts to get them to respond to you. And then again, there's ways for you to leverage an initial conversation as a co-host in a webinar or a podcast or product advisory board as a means to qualify them, as well as to do a partial product demonstration. The idea is that over time, you should be able to convert these by iterating on your product to a point where then it makes sense for them to ultimately buy it. Now, if you're not able to convert any of these into customers, then you have a product market fit problem, and that's an entirely different issue. So this is based on the fact that you have some semblance of market fit, or to get to an understanding if you have market fit. So that's how I structure outbound sequences. And again, like, this is not taking into account the different channels, but you can do each of these sequences through email and LinkedIn, social media, cold calls, ringless voicemail, text message, etc. Wherever your target ICPs, specifically more personas, end up spending most of their time. Thanks.